Hello everybody, Void here, experimenting with a brand new commander, one I think is actually pretty decent. I didn't think so at first because I didn't know if the ability would be enough, but Orah Skyclave Hierophant, the 4-mana white-black legendary core Cleric 3/3 lifelink creature, is actually pretty good as a commander. Whenever Orah Skyclave Hierophant or another Cleric you control dies, return target Cleric card with lesser converted mana cost from your graveyard to the battlefield. A big change this year, this was earlier, like back in March, was that if your commander were to die, like be destroyed, it wasn't exiled, yes, it goes back to the command zone, but it technically dies. So a lot of these death trigger commander options are now incredibly strong. Like you had Kokosho that would die, but if it was your commander, it would just go to the command zone. Now they've pretty much just made it so that if your commander goes to the command zone like that, it just dies. So that's fantastic. This is essentially the scrap trawler for Cleric, and it's a lot better now because playing with Clerics before, you didn't really have anything this strong with Reanimation. And there's a lot of good Cleric stuff for Reanimation, so if you can keep fooling around with a very strong strategy already, it's going to offer you more synergy. It's going to make the deck a lot more powerful. So first here, I want to go over the lands. It's the most boring part of the deck, but we have some standouts aside from mana fixing, which, we have the usual stuff like Command Tower, Godless Shrine, in black and white, but we do have Path of Ancestry. It taps to add 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. If that mana is spent to cast a creature that shares a creature type, we scry 1, so that creature type has to be the same as our commander. Pretty solid. Phyrexian Tower is a good sack outlet, and we get double the mana for it. Starlit Sanctum is a good card for Clerics because now that we have a good Reanimation strategy, we can sack a Cleric to either gain life equal to its toughness, or sack it to have an opponent lose life equal to a Cleric's power. And we have some Clerics that can get pretty big here too. And then we have Westvale Abbey. This is also pretty strong if we have a decent Reanimation strategy. Because 5 creatures, sacrificing them, that's usually going to be a big hit in most decks. But if we have a Scrap Trawler out there, or the Cleric version of a Scrap Trawler, we're just going to get a lot of stuff back anyway. And once we do sack those 5 creatures, we get Ormondal, which is a pretty insanely powerful creature in Commander. Flying lifelink indestructible haste 9/7. So good luck to our opponents. We do have some ramp here in the form of artifacts. We have Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Mind Stone, Orzhov Signet, Soul Ring, Talisman of Hierarchy, and Wayfarer's Bauble. As you can see, our deck isn't going to be a lot of mana for every spell. A lot of these Clerics are going to be 2 mana, 3 mana, 4 mana. They're not that big, so we shouldn't be spending a lot of mana in our setup. So, as you can see here, 1 mana, 2 mana for our ramp. That's pretty good. Alright, so now we can pretty much get into it. The rest is going to be synergy with our deck, whether it's Graveyard, Life Gain, or Clerics. But that's pretty much it. You get those 3 main strategies here. We have Alms Collector for draw. If there's a weakness in the deck, I would say it's getting consistent card draw, but Alms Collector is good to go up against many decks. Like if you're going up against a blue deck, they're going to be drawing in excess, you can guarantee that. This will help you draw and kind of even it out. Bygone Bishop will reward you for casting small creatures. Like I mentioned, Clerics don't tend to be that big, so CMC 3 or less, you're going to get a Clue artifact token that you can sack for 2 mana to draw a card. Not super efficient card draw, but it's something. We have the newer card from M21, Mangara the Diplomat, which is a very political card. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you, or a planeswalker you control, you get to draw a card. And whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. So, something you have to pay attention to, but could offer you some serious card draw. Skull Clamp, obviously this is a deck that's going to be killing off creatures, bringing them back. One of the craziest value cards you could have. And then we have Tabarak's Hope's Demise. Believe it or not, a lot of the deck is before Zendikar Rising. Clerics already had a pretty decent core. They just needed a strategy to really hammer it home. Tabarak's is a new card from Zendikar Rising, has lifelink as long as it has 5 or more +1/+1 counters on it, and whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Tabarak's. If that creature was a Cleric, you get to draw a card. If you do, you lose a life. So very powerful Cleric. This is one of those Clerics that could get big, so you could sacrifice it to your Starlit Sanctum. which I think is pretty decent. We have Twilight Prophet. It's not going to technically say draw, but you get an additional card at the beginning of your upkeep, so it pretty much is. You also get a little bit of life gain too. Time to the Weaver, kind of the same thing. We're going to fool around with life gain and life loss, but it's more combat related, so we're going to be drawing some more cards that way. And for search, we're going to be focusing on graveyard stuff, so Buried Alive. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into our graveyard. Very good setup for a Scrap Trawler ability, because you could just have creatures with different CMCs. They could be tiny creatures, so you're pretty much guaranteed to get them back. And we also have Entomb to kind of do the same thing, but get a really good one instead. We have Dark Supplicant, which is going to come into play later when we talk about our reanimation. We sacrifice 3 clerics to search our graveyard, hand, and or library for a card named Scion of Darkness and put it into play. So this is really just a fun synergy for me, because it kind of plays into clerics and demon worshipping. Even though Scion of Darkness is an avatar, it looks like a frickin' demon. But we're going to talk about Scion of Darkness later. We have Diabolic Intent. Might actually be better than Demonic Tutor in this deck, since we can sack a creature and then trigger Orah. And then we have a Weathered Wayfarer, which is a land search. But as far as 1-drop creatures go, this one is insanely powerful. 1 mana, if you're behind on lands to any one of your opponents, you can search for any land. It doesn't have to be a specific, like a basic land. It could be your Starlit Sanctum or Westvale Abbey. Now we do have some removal. It's going to be instants and sorceries as well as some clerics. We have the usual Anguished Unmaking in black and white. You can't really go without this spell. We have probably the best board wipe in white, Austere Command. We have Demon's Disciple, which is kind of the new cleric version of a Fleshbag Marauder, which as you could expect in a graveyard-focused cleric deck is going to be even better. Because you can just bring it back, sack more creatures, maybe even loop some certain things. Just another way to add more teeth to this strategy, and I think it's wonderful. We have Dispark, but we also have Fiend Hunter and Leonin Relic Warder. These are both creatures that when they enter, you kind of exile something until they leave. Fiend Hunter just works for creatures. Leonin Relic Warder pretty much works for any artifact enchantment. So yes, they could be removed and the person gets their card back, but that's still pretty good depending on the situation. Merciless Eviction, very good board wipe in black and white. And we also have Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares because we can't really go without that. Remorseful Cleric is incredibly underrated, like crazy underrated. We can sacrifice it, exile all cards from target player's graveyard. We can keep bringing it back and pretty much ensure that our opponents don't have a decent graveyard. Ridiculous card. And for more removal, we have War Priest of Thune. When it enters the battlefield, we may destroy target enchantment. A lot better in this kind of deck where we can keep bringing it back and targeting other enchantments. Now on to Reanimation. It's a pretty big deal in the deck. We have Bishop of Rebirth. Not my favorite, but it does have a good attack trigger where we can return a target creature card with CMC 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. So it's a worse Sun Titan, but it's also a cleric, so it does synergize. We have Celestial Gatekeeper, which is like a worse Revulark for clerics and birds, apparently, where instead of it just dying, you have to exile it, but you do get 2 creatures back. We have Doomed Necromancer, which is a big cleric that I wanted to add to clerics before, but I didn't really feel like there was enough reanimation synergy. Now we have it, and this card's going to be so powerful because of it. So we can sacrifice it by paying 1 black mana and tapping it, and we return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. So with Orah, that's pretty much going to be 2 creatures. We have Liliana Heretical Healer, which is a cleric. And whenever another non-token creature we control dies, we can exile her, flip her, have her come back as a planeswalker, and we get a 2/2 zombie. But she flips into Liliana Defiant Necromancer. Her +2 is each player discards a card. Her -X is return target non-legendary creature card with converted mana cost X from our graveyard to the battlefield. So this is already worth its weight. In her alt -8, you get an emblem with whenever a creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. We have Ravos Soul Tender, not technically reanimation, but we get a card back from our graveyard to our hand. And it's also an anthem for our other creatures, so it's not a bad cleric. Scion of Darkness is not a cleric, but it's the avatar I mentioned before that we can search up. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we may put target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control, so it's reanimation for our opponent's graveyards, which I'm always a big fan of because it makes the game more interesting when you don't always prepare for what you're going to get, but it turns out to be really powerful regardless. We have Teshar Ancestor's Apostle, so as I showed you, there's a lot of cheap clerics. Whenever you cast a historic spell, so artifacts, legendaries, you're going to be able to bring back a creature CMC 3 or less from our graveyard. And then we have Whisper Blood Liturgist, kind of like a worse Doomed Necromancer because we have to sacrifice 2 creatures. But again, because we have Orah, that cost is not going to be that severe. And we have a couple clerics that I didn't really think fit into any of those categories. So we have Edgewalker here. Cleric spells we play cost a white and a black less to play, and then only reduces the amount of colored mana. So our Orah could only cost 2 generic the first time around, which is pretty powerful. Rotlung Reanimator is a good death trigger for clerics. Whenever it or another cleric is put into a graveyard from play, you put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into play. So I just like that synergy for clerics. We do have some life gain here. Ancestor's Prophet. We tap 5 untapped clerics we control to gain 10 life. Really crazy to just do this whenever we're able to, just for fun. And then we have a ton of these clerics because that's what clerics do. They gain you a lot of life when things enter the battlefield. We have Auriok Champion. We have Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, Suture Priest, and the new card, Cleric of Life's Bond. Whenever another cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. And whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So it could get bigger. I don't think it's going to get super big, but just more of the same life gain. We have Children of Corliss. We can sacrifice it. We gain life equal to the life we've lost this turn, which before, I don't think this was a very powerful card, but if you can keep bringing it back with Orah, you can pretty much negate whatever life loss you're experiencing in the game. And then we have Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose, pretty much a Sanguine Bond on a creature. So yeah, with all those life gain abilities that I just showed you, we're going to have our opponents lose a lot of life. Also, the activated ability for 5 mana just gives creatures we control lifelink until end of turn. We have some protection cards, which isn't just technically protection, it's defending you from damage, defending you on your turn, all that stuff. Battletide Alchemist, if a source would deal damage to a player, we may prevent X of that damage, where X is the number of clerics we control. We have both Giver of Runes and Mother of Runes. Can't really go wrong with giving a creature protection from a single color. Makes it very difficult to ruin our strategy. We have Grand Abolisher to protect us on our turn. During our turn, our opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments, pretty much making it safe to do whatever we want to do. We have a lot of powerful plays here. We can force our opponents to lose a lot of life. We don't want that to be interrupted. We have Lightning Greaves to do what Lightning Greaves does. We have Master Apothecary. We can tap an untapped cleric we control to prevent the next 2 damage that would be dealt to a creature or player this turn. Not super powerful, but if we have a bunch of clerics, we can just tap each of them to reduce the damage we would take, or reduce the damage a creature would take. It's pretty sweet. And we have Selfless Spirit, probably going to be one of the more annoying clerics in the deck, because we can just keep bringing it back, sacrifice it, creatures we control gain indestructible until end of turn. You can see how that's going to work out. And we do have some sacrifice outlets to end the deck. Ashnod's Altar to give us mana. Ailey Eternal Pilgrim, we could sack a creature, gain life. And then once we have enough life, we can start sacrificing other creatures to exile target non-land permanents. We have Cabal Archon, which I think is going to be pretty underrated. You can pay a black and sacrifice a cleric. Target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. It's just one of those slow ways that you can drain life from your opponents. And if you have nothing better to do, if you have Orah out there, you're going to be getting your clerics back anyway. We have Priest of Forgotten Gods. We can sack 2 other creatures and get a ton of value. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature. You add 2 black mana to your mana pool and draw a card. And then we have Yawgmoth Thran Physician, just in case you wanted more value. You can pay a life, sack another creature, put a -1/-1 counter up to 1 target creature and draw a card. And you can pay 2 mana to discard a card and proliferate. Just insane value for that card. But anyway guys, hope you enjoyed this deck tech for Orah Skyclave Hierophant. I so desperately wanted to see some more cleric support, and I'm glad we got it in a set I wasn't really prepared to see it in, Zendikar. Overall, I think Zendikar Rising is just turning out to be a pretty interesting set with some good tribal synergies. But anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next time.